Hello and welcome back to the Data Privacy Lawyer. Today's review is going to be on Molson. We're going to be looking at their privacy notice. Now, I'm not terribly familiar with this brand. I put together, it looks like they do drinks. Okay, cool. So we're going to be looking at their privacy policy or notice. I am not sure what they consider their public-facing document yet. All right, so this is a really good example. We can see that this was last modified and the effective date is September 1st, 2021. This privacy policy hasn't been updated in 4 years. Now, this could mean one of two things. It could mean that nothing has changed with how Molson Coors beverage company processes personal data, or it could mean that they haven't reviewed this and they haven't reviewed the obligations they have since 2021. Now, I don't know that for a fact. It may be that they have reviewed this and it's still in line. Let me tell you what has definitely changed. The data protection laws in the United States have definitely changed since 2021. Now, the question I would have for Molson is, have you reviewed your representations on your site to ensure that you are adhering to the new data protection laws? Because that's going to influence whether or not you're in compliance with those data protection laws. The laws change. If your business isn't changing, then the laws definitely change, which is why these privacy policies and notices should be reviewed at least at a minimum on an annual basis. Now, I have different advice for clients in different industries, but it really does depend on what your company does with personal data, the personal data that you utilize. There's lots of different factors that go into it, but on a general recommendation, companies need to be updating this on an annual basis. Let's take a look at when this applies. Applicability is very important. Some consumers, this privacy policy is not going to apply to them. This particular one applies when personal data is collected about individuals related to the sites. So we can see websites, social media pages, and promotional sites, or sites that we control or which link to this privacy policy, okay? This privacy policy does not apply to personal information we obtain in our capacity as an employer. Now, I'm very intrigued about this. I'll tell you why. Molson Coors has a link to careers here. I'm actually going to click it. If personal data is being collected on the site related to careers, then it may be that there needs to be a link or additional insight into what this sentence means, okay? If you're applying for a career, then the category of data subject that you generally will be is a prospective employee. Now, sometimes companies on their website will collect employee data. But what's interesting here is Molson Coors has said that this privacy policy doesn't apply to personal information we obtain in our capacity as an employer. So one thing I would do as a privacy counsel is I would make sure that there definitely isn't any personal information that Molson Coors is collecting on its employees related to the site. And I'll tell you ways that sometimes organizations implicitly collect their employee data without knowing they're collecting it from the site. Sometimes companies will beta test certain functions of the website and they will ask their employees to do it in their capacity as an employee. That's just one example. I don't know if that's the case here, but we're just talking about some of the provisions on this site. If your employee is beta testing different functions of your website, then that needs to be accommodated for, because this privacy policy, if you're putting a provision that says it discusses your practices in connection with personal information collected about individuals as they interact with the products and services, including your website, and you have employees in their capacity as an employee testing certain functions that require the collection of personal data, you need to be very, very careful about what you put as a representation on your site. Because what you're telling all of the consumers of your website social media pages is that this doesn't apply to personal information obtained in their capacity as an employer. So I'm just looking at every provision from every which angle and giving you insight into what might be applicable and what companies should look at. Okay, so we've got this table here. I know that Molson Coors definitely operates in the United States, and that's really important because what law is applicable to your organization depends on where you process personal information, and what you put on your privacy policy is in scope. What applies determines or depends on where your goods and services are provided and whose personal information you're collecting. Something US companies need to know is that there are certain thresholds that must be met before a certain state privacy law applies to your organization. not every US state privacy law is going to apply to your organization if you do not meet the threshold. And in order for you to know whether you meet the threshold, you'd need to go onto the state's website and check out the applicable state privacy law. Now, that can be done very easily if you have a privacy counsel that's keeping up to date and researching that information for your organization on an ongoing basis. But it is something that organizations need to be aware of. And just because you don't know that you meet the threshold doesn't mean that the law doesn't apply to your company. Let's keep going on how we may collect the personal information. It can be collected from you, from the sites and applications, offline, online tracking technologies, and we actually have the cookie banner, which I had originally ignored. But let's take a look at the rights. I'm interested. They've got a couple buttons. I consent to the cookies, decline all, want to know more, or privacy rights. So we're actually going to click the rights. Okay, so we have a data subject request form. What's interesting is I'm going to go back to the policy and I'm going to search for cookies. I want to see what we're actually declining. So let's go to this section. So we've got different cookies. We've got required, strictly necessary, functional, and advertising. So it's not clear to me whether pressing decline all means that I'm declining the functional and advertising cookies, or if it's separate. I think it would be useful for there to be a preference center so we can actually identify what it is we're declining if we're choosing to decline, or what we're consenting to. I will say it's very good that we've got a button to consent or decline, and it's just as easy to consent as it is to withdraw that consent. That's really important and is actually a requirement under the data protection laws. But that being said, I think it's important to know more. Let's click that. Okay, good. This was what I was originally looking for. And again, I wanted to be able to scroll down to confirm that functional cookies and advertising cookies was what was displayed on the privacy policy. I'm pretty sure it is. And you can see we're currently clicking no. This particular preference center is powered by TrustArc. We've actually reviewed a couple of the consent management platforms. I'm considering putting together a list of all of the popular consent management platforms, and then we can review the different features that they provide for organizations that are doing inquiries on whether or not they should go with a particular platform. We're actually going to decline all of the ones that are applicable. I'm going to keep these in mind because I want to scroll down and ensure that the preference center that we're reviewing here aligns with the representations about which cookies are utilized by Molson Coors. And we can see here they've got required, functional, and advertising. So we're just going to search functional. Okay. So we've got required, functional, and advertising. So it aligns with the preference center. So I really hope you enjoyed this particular review. If you are needing a privacy counsel to review your privacy practices, or you need insight into doing a gap analysis for your program, take a look at the description below and I'll see you in another review.